For most of your life, the answer to a struggling cutting came in a bag. A little jar of rooting powder for $12, a sack of special mix, a misting kit you used twice and left out in the shed to gather dust. But think back to the gardeners you grew up around, the ones who filled a whole yard with roses and figs and lilacs, back when money was tight and there wasn't a garden center on every corner. They did all of it with a sharp knife, a jar of rainwater off the roof, and a few plain things already sitting in the kitchen. And here's the promise I want to make you right up front. Almost any branch you can reach can be made to grow roots. That part is true. The catch is that nobody selling you anything has much reason to tell you how simple it really is. So we're going to walk through 15 of those things, one at a time. The small, honest, nearly free steps that turn a bare twig into a living plant with roots of its own. Some of them you've heard of and been told wrong about. A couple of them you've almost certainly never been told at all. And by the time we're done, you may never look at that garden center shelf quite the same way again. Now, if you've ever done everything you thought was right, a clean cut, fresh water, a bright window, and still stood there watching a cutting go soft and brown at the bottom, I want you to hear this plainly. That was almost never your fault. Most of the propagation advice out there quietly skips the handful of small details that actually decide whether roots form. And it isn't some grand conspiracy. The truth is simpler, and honestly a little sadder than that. You cannot patent a willow tree. You cannot bottle the words "cut below the node." Nobody reorders a spoonful of honey every spring. The steps that cost nothing simply never had a salesman behind them. So somewhere over the years, they slipped out of the story we all got told. What's left in the story is mostly the stuff with a price tag on it. Nobody buried this knowledge in a vault, mind you. The market just never had a reason to keep reminding you of things it couldn't put in a box and ring up at the register. So, let's put the free part back, one piece at a time. And let's start with the single most important cut you'll ever make. The first thing is where you cut, and it has almost nothing to do with that fancy 45-degree angle everyone loves to talk about. Now, an angled cut isn't wrong. It sheds water, and it helps you remember which end is up, but it is not the secret, and chasing the perfect angle while missing this next part is exactly how good gardeners lose cuttings. Run your fingers slowly along any stem, and you'll feel little bumps or raised bands at the spots where leaves come out. Those are called nodes, and here's what matters. A node is where a plant keeps its most capable cells, the ones that can still turn into anything at all. A leaf, a shoot, or a root. Cut too far away from one, out in the bare middle of the stem, and you've handed the cutting the one stretch of wood that is least able to root. So make your cut just below a node, about a quarter inch under it, and leave 2 or 3 more nodes above that. Strip the leaves off the bottom node, because any leaf left sitting down in the water will rot and foul the whole jar within days. And use something truly sharp and truly clean. A razor blade, a box cutter, or a pair of shears wiped down with rubbing alcohol. A crushed, ragged cut from dull kitchen scissors closes off the very channels the cutting drinks through, and it hands it a rotted doorway. The old propagation manuals, Hartman and Kester, the thick book that nursery growers have leaned on for generations, put the node first for a reason. Get that one thing right, and you are already a full step ahead of most folks walking out of the store with a bag of powder they didn't need. The second thing feels wrong the very first time you do it, because you are going to hurt the cutting on purpose. Stay with me, because this is one of the oldest tricks the old nurserymen had, and it's nearly a lost art now. Take that clean blade, or even just your thumbnail, and scrape a thin strip of the outer skin off the bottom inch of the stem along 1 or 2 sides. Just enough to reveal the greener, wetter layer sitting underneath. That layer has a name. It's the cambium, the thin living ribbon of cells right under the bark, and it is the exact place where new roots are born. When you wound it, 2 good things happen at the very same time. First, you give the plant more raw, open surface to push roots out from, and second, you give it a reason to send its own rooting hormone, a natural auxin, rushing straight to that spot to heal it. And this is the part I really want you to hold on to, because it makes sense of every other thing on this list. The true engine of rooting is not any powder in any jar. It is the plant's own auxin pooling right there at the wound. The woody, stubborn ones, a rose, a hydrangea, a camellia, root far better with a small wound than without one. The one mistake to avoid is going too deep or peeling the stem all the way around in a ring. That girdles it and shuts off the flow entirely. A thin scrape down one side is all it ever takes. Do that, and you've told the cutting, in the only language it understands, exactly where you'd like the roots to grow. The third thing saves more cuttings than any bottle on earth, and it will cost you nothing at all. Give the cutting less to carry. Picture the real fix your cutting is in. It has a head full of leaves losing water into the air all day long, and it has no roots yet to pull that water back up. Left with a full crown of leaves, it simply runs itself dry and wilts, no matter how perfect the water below is. So, take off the lower leaves. And if the leaves you keep are large, a fig leaf, a hydrangea leaf, an avocado leaf, cut each one in half straight across the middle. Yes, you give up a little bit of light gathering by doing that, but you cut the loss far, far more, and that trade almost always lands in favor of new roots. On the fussier ones, there's a second move that works like magic. Slip the whole cutting under a clear plastic bag or a cut-off soda bottle turned upside down over the pot. Prop it up so the plastic doesn't actually touch the leaves. That little dome traps a pocket of damp air around the cutting, so it barely has to work at all to stay watered while it builds those first roots. Just remember to crack it open every few days to let fresh air in. Seal it up tight and leave it, and you'll trade drying out for rotting. And rot, as you're about to see in the very next step, is the real enemy in this whole business. The fourth thing is the one nobody ever prints on a label, because there is simply nothing in it to sell you. Plain, ordinary cleanliness. Here is the truth that took years to really believe, standing over jar after jar of mush. Most cuttings do not fail because they couldn't make roots. They fail because bacteria and fungi got into that open wound first and rotted it out from the inside before roots ever had a chance to form. Think about what a jar on a warm sill really is. Warm water, a fresh raw cut, a little sugar leaking out of the stem. That is a perfect little soup for exactly the wrong microbes. So before you reach for a single additive, do the free things first. Wipe your blade with rubbing alcohol between every cutting. Wash the jar or the pot in hot water, not dish soap, because even a thin invisible film of soap left behind can burn tender plant tissue. Start with clean water at room temperature, rainwater if you're lucky enough to catch it. None of that costs a dime. Dr. Jeff Gilman, a horticulture professor who spent years actually testing the old garden remedies one by one, found that most of the miracle cures do very little. But simple cleanliness and good technique do more for your success than nearly anything you can buy. The real mistake, and I made it for years, is reaching for some fancy bottle while ignoring the dirty jar that's actually sinking you. The fifth thing is already sitting in your spice rack, and it is your cheapest insurance against exactly that rot: ground cinnamon. The same warm spice you stir into your oatmeal carries real compounds. Cinnamaldehyde is the main one that genuinely slows fungi down. Laboratories have measured it against the very molds that cause what gardeners call damping off. That's that heartbreaking moment when a healthy little cutting or seedling suddenly keels over. Rotted clean through right at the soil line, overnight. Now, I'm going to be honest with you the way a friend across the fence should be. Cinnamon is not a rooting hormone. Dusting it on will not call roots into being, and anyone who tells you it will is selling you a story. What it does do is stand guard over that fresh wound while the plant gets on with its own quiet rooting. So once you've made your cut, tap the bottom half-inch into a little pile of cinnamon before you set it into water or mix. The same light dusting works over a tray of seed starting mix too. If damping off has robbed you of seedlings before, it's nearly free. It cannot hurt the plant, and it buys your cutting precious time during those first vulnerable days when it is most likely to rot out from under you. Use it with a light hand, a thin dusting on the surface, not a thick paste worked down into the mix. And you get the guard without smothering the good life in your soil. When something is that cheap, that harmless, and that easy, the only real mistake you can make is not bothering to try it. The sixth thing sits in almost every kitchen cupboard, and gardeners have been reaching for it for a very, very long time. Honey. Here's what honey actually does, and it's worth getting right because it's usually explained backwards. Honey is a natural preservative. That is the whole reason a jar of it sitting in your pantry never really spoils. It holds so little water of its own that it draws moisture straight out of any bacteria or fungi that land in it, and its own enzymes give off a trace of hydrogen peroxide, a very mild disinfectant. So when you dab a little over a fresh cut, you have laid a thin protective coat right over the wound, doing the very same job as the cinnamon, just from another corner of the kitchen. What honey is not, in spite of every video that tells you otherwise, is a rooting hormone. It will not order roots into being. But by keeping that wound clean while the cutting's own auxin gets down to work, it genuinely can nudge your odds upward. When researchers have put honey to the test against a store-bought rooting product, the results came back mixed and honest. Honey helped on some plants, did little on others, and it was never quite the miracle the internet promised. There's one key so you don't undo the whole thing. Never plunge a cutting straight into thick raw honey. Being a preservative, it can pull water right back out of your stem. Stir a spoonful into a little warm water first and dip into that instead. Raw, local honey with its enzymes still alive does this best of all. The seventh thing has been used since the days of ancient Rome, and it grows for free along nearly every creek, ditch, and riverbank in the country. The humble willow. Snap off a willow branch, and you are holding one of the very few kitchen and garden remedies with real, honest chemistry behind it. Willow carries two useful things at once. The first is a natural auxin, indole 3-butyric acid, which is the very same rooting compound the laboratories bottle up and sell right back to you as powder. The second is salicylic acid, that close cousin of aspirin, which helps a cutting shrug off infection while it works. There's an old saying that a willow is a stick already trying to root, and it's nearly true. Jam a fresh willow whip in damp ground upside down, and it'll often root anyway. So we borrow that power. To make willow water, gather young green, bendy willow twigs. The fresh spring growth is the richest. Snip them into short pieces, cover them with boiling water like you're brewing a strong tea, and let it steep overnight until it turns the color of amber. Strain it off and stand your cuttings in that water for the first day or two. Now the honest measure of it, willow water does its best work on the easy to middling cuttings, the ones already half inclined to root. It is not going to force a stubborn apple branch, but it is free. It is real and you truly cannot overdo it, which is a good deal more than that $12 jar can honestly claim. The only real mistake is expecting the creek to do the work that the node and the wound should already be doing for you. The eighth thing you may already be growing on a windowsill right now, aloe vera. That same fat leaf you'd snap open for a sunburn holds a clear inner gel that is mostly water with a little salicylic acid, some amino acids, and a handful of trace minerals folded into it. As a helper for cuttings, it works a bit like honey and willow shaken gently together. It keeps the cut end from drying out. It carries mild germ-fighting compounds, and it hands the cutting a few small building blocks of its own besides. To use it, scoop the clear gel out from inside a lower leaf. Skip the yellowish layer just under the green skin, which can irritate. Blend a spoonful of that gel with a little lukewarm water and let your cutting soak in it before you set it up. There's even an old trick where you slit a thick aloe leaf and push the cutting right into it, then plant them together so the gel feeds the cutting slowly as it breaks down. The research on aloe is genuinely a mixed bag. Some studies found it roughly matched a store hormone on certain plants, and on the easy things you'll often get roots with it or without it. It's a gentle, free boost. It is not a magic wand, but it costs you one leaf off a plant that will never even miss it. And on a tricky cutting, a little extra protection is never once wasted. The ninth thing surprises people more than any other because it has nothing to do with what you add to the jar. It's warmth. A cutting roots with its metabolism, and metabolism, like an old wood stove, runs on heat. Keep the bottom of that cutting somewhere between about 70 and 75 degrees Celsius, and every single step of rooting speeds up. The cells divide quicker, the hormones travel faster, the callus and the roots come sooner. Let it sit somewhere cold, and the cutting doesn't die exactly. It just stalls. It sits there for weeks waiting on a spring that never quite arrives. The old-timers had a fine saying for this: warm feet, cool head. You want the roots down below kept warm and the top of the plant kept cool and calm. And you do not need to buy a gadget for it. The top of the refrigerator, where the motor gives off a steady, gentle warmth all day and night, is honestly one of the finest rooting spots in the whole house. Our mothers and grandmothers knew that one well. A small seedling heat mat under the tray works too, for just a few dollars. The mistake, and it's an easy one to make, is that sunny winter windowsill that feels warm and pleasant at noon and then turns to ice against the glass by nightfall. That hot, then cold whipsaw, night after night, can set a cutting back for weeks on end. Steady and mildly warm beats hot, then cold every single time. The 10th thing is light, and it comes with a cruel little trap worth knowing about. A cutting does need some light to make the energy it roots with, but, and here's the trap, a cutting with no roots yet cannot possibly drink fast enough to replace the water that hot, direct sun burns straight off its leaves. Set it on a south-facing sill in the full afternoon sun, and it will scorch and wilt while it is still standing right there with its feet in the water. It dies of thirst in a glass of water. What a cutting truly wants is bright light, but indirect light. An east-facing window with soft morning sun, a spot set back a few feet from a bright window, out of the direct beam. Just enough light to keep that little inner engine ticking over, and not one bit more that would dry the cutting out from the top down. Keep it clear of cold drafts and well away from any heat vent blowing warm air across the leaves. Both of those steal moisture faster than a rootless cutting can ever spare it. The tougher, thicker-leaved cuttings, geraniums, coleus, most succulents, will forgive a little more light. The soft, thin-leaved ones, begonias, ferns, most anything freshly leafed out, want that gentler, shadier corner. When in doubt, err toward too little sun rather than too much, because a cutting can wait in soft light, but it cannot come back once it's cooked. Get the light gentle and steady, and you have finally matched the top of the cutting to the warmth you already gave its feet. Two invisible forces, light and heat, working together instead of against each other. The 11th thing is the one that almost everyone gets wrong with a simple glass of water, and it is completely invisible: oxygen. We tend to picture roots needing only water, but roots breathe. They need oxygen right there at their growing tips, just as much as they need the water itself. And water left standing still in a warm jar slowly loses the air that's dissolved in it, goes stale and flat, and begins to quietly suffocate the very root tips that are trying so hard to form. That cloudy, slightly sour-smelling jar of water on the windowsill? That is the problem sitting there in plain sight. And the fix for it is almost embarrassingly easy. Change the water out every 3 to 4 days for fresh, and each time you do, rinse the jar with plain hot water only, never soap. A small lump of aquarium charcoal dropped into the jar helps keep it clear between changes. And if you really want to give the hard-to-root ones a genuine edge, a little aquarium air pump with an air stone bubbling away quietly at the bottom of the jar keeps the water full of oxygen around the clock. That one simple thing can wake up cuttings that only ever sat and sulked and rotted before. It turns a plain glass of water into something close to a proper propagation tank. Fresh moving water roots faster than still. Stale water very nearly every time. Everything we have walked through so far, the node and the wound, the honey and the cinnamon and the willow, the warm feet and the fresh moving water, is part of a short, plain list of what actually matters and what truly doesn't. It is important to know how long each different kind of cutting really takes to root, so you're not left wondering if you've killed it or if it's just taking its own sweet time. The next few things are the ones for the stubborn branches, the ones that have beaten you before and left you wondering if some plants just can't be done. There's a very good reason they wouldn't root in a glass of water no matter what you dropped into it. And once you understand that reason, a whole other half of the garden opens up to you. The 12th thing is the real secret behind those stubborn ones. Sometimes the water itself is the whole problem. Here is what most folks are simply never told. The roots a cutting grows down in a glass of water are not the same roots it needs to live in soil. They come in softer, wider, more brittle, and they often struggle badly and sulk for weeks when you finally try to pot them up. Worse than that, a great many woody plants, a lot of the fruit trees, the magnolias, the evergreens, the junipers, will simply rot before they will ever root sitting in a jar of water. What those cuttings are actually asking for is air and moisture at the very same time, and that is exactly what a gritty rooting bed gives them. Coarse builder's sand or perlite, or a half and half blend of the two, holds water like a wrung-out sponge. Damp all the way through, but shot full of air pockets, too. Push a well-prepared cutting a couple of inches down into moistened coarse sand. Keep it warm and humid under a dome. Mist it now and again, and you can root plants that a plain glass of water would only ever have drowned. Give it 6 to 8 weeks in there, and you'll often find a healthy root system when you gently lift it. Now, for the very hardest cases of all, like a mature apple or an avocado, there's an even older method where you root the branch while it's still attached to the mother tree. But the lesson here is simple. The mistake is dooming a woody cutting to a jar and then blaming the branch. It was the wrong bed, never the wrong branch. The 13th thing costs you nothing whatsoever, and it quietly beats every single additive on this entire list. Timing. The very same branch that fights you tooth and nail in October can root almost all on its own in June. Here's why. All through the growing season, a plant is already running on its own natural rooting hormones. The soft, green, springy new growth of late spring and early summer, what the growers call softwood, is primed and ready and eager to root fast. The firmer, half-ripened wood from a bit later in the summer, semi-hardwood, roots a little slower but steadier. And the bare, dormant hardwood of deep winter is a whole different craft again, one that asks for real patience. So, when a cutting simply will not take for you before you reach for a single trick or tonic, stop and ask yourself what month it is. Our grandparents kept an old farmer's almanac by the door and planted by the calendar and the seasons, and there was real wisdom folded into that habit. Match your cutting to the plant's own natural rhythm. Softwood taken in the flush of early summer for most of what you'll ever want to grow means you are suddenly working with the plant instead of fighting against it. There is no bottle you can buy for good timing. There never will be, and that, more than anything, is exactly why so few people ever think to mention it to you. The 14th thing decides almost everything before you have even made your cut. Choose the right branch to begin with. A cutting can never, ever be healthier than the plant it came from. It carries that mother plant's vigor and also its stresses and its hidden diseases straight into the jar along with it. So take your cuttings from a healthy, well-watered plant and take them early in the morning when the stems are plump and full of water, not wilted and drooping in the heat of the afternoon. Choose a strong, actively growing shoot. And here is the part that folks nearly always miss, the one that quietly ruins so many attempts. Skip any stem that's flowering or busy setting flower buds. A plant that's pouring all its energy into making blooms has precious little left over for making roots, and a flowering cutting will often spend itself trying to open those flowers in the jar instead of rooting at all. A plain, leafy, non-flowering shoot from a thriving plant will outroot a fancy, flowering one nearly every time you try it. Pinch off any buds before you set it. And here's a habit every old nurseryman shares. Never take just one. Take 3 or 4 cuttings when you take any, because some will always fail no matter how careful you are, and that's not a mark against you. It's simply the nature of the thing. A few extras cost you nothing but a minute, and they turn a nervous gamble into a comfortable near certainty. Begin with good, healthy stock taken in the cool of the morning. Take a few for insurance, and honestly, half the battle is already won before you've even walked back inside the house. The 15th thing is the one no label ever mentions, because by the time it matters, the sale is already long over. The day your cutting finally shows its first little white roots is not the finish line you think it is. It's a birth. Those first roots are tender, fragile things grown up in the easy, sheltered life of water or a soft mix. And if you yank that cutting straight out into hard garden ground and full sun, the shock alone can undo every bit of the patient work you just did. So go slow with it now, right at the end. Pot it up first into a small container of good living soil, real soil, alive with compost. Keep it shaded and gently watered for a couple of weeks while those young roots toughen up and slowly learn to pull from soil instead of from water. Only then, once it's holding its own, do you move it out to its permanent place in the garden. Be patient with that first year, too. Most cuttings spend their first season simply settling in and building roots below the ground where you can't see the work happening. And when you finally do plant it out, remember what all 15 of these steps were really building toward. You didn't just grow yourself a free plant, you grew a set of living roots, and roots in the end have to live somewhere. I find myself thinking about the gardeners who first taught me all of this, the ones who never bought a jar of anything in their lives, who would root a whole hedge from one neighbor's clipping over the back fence and think absolutely nothing of it. They understood something the seed catalogs and the garden centers slowly talked the rest of us out of remembering. A rooted cutting is only ever a promise. What actually keeps that promise is the ground you set it down into. Soil that is alive, full of the fungi and the earthworms and the small, quiet lives that feed a plant far better than any of us ever could from a bag. Dr. Elaine Ingham has spent an entire career showing just how much of a plant's real health is the hidden work of that living soil beneath it. Feed that soil, and these 15 little cuttings quietly grow into a garden that begins at last to feed itself. So take up the sharp knife and the jar of rainwater. Take the honey and the willow twig and the cool morning branch. You were never really missing a product on a shelf. You were only ever missing the handful of quiet, honest, unpretendable little steps that nobody ever had a good reason to sell you. And if that is the kind of gardening you come from, or the kind you would still like to grow into at any age, then you already belong right here with us. Let's keep growing the old honest way together, one rooted branch at a time. If this story changed the way you look at the plants in your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Plant the future. The next treasure will open soon.